Michael Radford stood at the edge of his property, hands on his hips, staring at the certified letter he dropped onto the freshly tilled soil. The morning sun cast long shadows across the 3 acres he purchased just 18 months ago in the Whispering Pines community, 3 acres that, according to every document he'd signed, belonged to him. Yet somehow, the letter at his feet claimed otherwise. Cease and desist all excavation activities immediately, the Homeowners Association's notice had demanded in bold type. Unauthorized landscape modifications in violation of community bylaws. Daily fines of $60,000 will commence in 72 hours if compliance is not met. Michael picked up the letter, crumpled it slightly in his fist, then smoothed it out again, examining the HOA president's signature, Elaine Winters. The same Elaine Winters who'd waved cheerfully from her porch when he moved in. The same woman who brought him a welcome basket filled with local honey and artisanal bread. $60,000 a day, he muttered, shaking his head as he surveyed the half-completed pond before him. For building a pond on my own damn property. The excavator he'd rented sat idle at the edge of the large depression he'd been working on for the past week. The natural spring that had initially attracted him to this property bubbled gently through the loose soil, beginning to fill a basin he carefully designed. Native water plants waited in containers nearby, ready to create the wildlife sanctuary he'd envisioned when he first walked this land. Michael had moved to Whispering Pines after 20 years in the city, seeking peace and a connection to nature after his divorce. The pond had become more than just a landscaping project. It was his healing place, his way forward. Each shovelful of earth had been therapeutic, each carefully placed stone a building block toward his new life. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text from his neighbor, Grant. HOA emergency meeting tonight, 7 o'clock. They're talking about your pond. Thought you should know. Michael sighed and looked back at his house, the modest 3-bedroom ranch he'd renovated himself. He'd read through the HOA bylaws before purchasing. They regulated house colors, fence heights, and lawn maintenance. But nowhere, absolutely nowhere, had there been restrictions about water features on back acreage. The distant sound of a car door slamming drew his attention to the road. A black SUV had pulled up, and Elaine Winters was marching across his front yard, clipboard in hand, and 2 board members trailing behind her like obedient soldiers. "Mr. Radford," she called out, her voice carrying across the property. "I assume you've received our notice?" Michael felt his jaw tighten. He'd always been a reasonable man, diplomatic in his 20 years as an environmental engineer. But something about Elaine's tone, condescending, almost gleeful in its authority, lit a fire in him that he hadn't felt in years. "I have indeed, Mrs. Winters," he replied, walking toward them. "And I'm curious which bylaw specifically prohibits a landowner from building a wildlife pond on their own property." Elaine's smile tightened. Section 8, paragraph 12. No modifications that substantially alter drainage or natural water flow may be made without board approval. "This doesn't alter drainage," Michael countered. "It enhances it. I'm an environmental engineer, and this pond is unauthorized," Elaine interrupted. "And the board has voted. You have 72 hours, Mr. Radford." As the 3 HOA representatives turned to leave, Michael called after them. "And if I don't comply?" Elaine turned, her smile now vanished entirely. "Then perhaps Whispering Pines isn't the community for you after all." Michael spent the rest of the day in his home office, surrounded by stacks of papers, property deeds, HOA bylaws, county regulations, and environmental protection statutes. His engineering background had taught him to be methodical, to approach problems with logic rather than emotion. But as the afternoon wore on, his frustration mounted. Section 8, paragraph 12, he muttered, flipping through the dog-eared HOA handbook for the 20th time. The clause about water modifications was there, but it was vague at best, certainly not specific enough to prohibit a wildlife pond that used an existing natural spring. More importantly, the bylaw referred specifically to the community's shared drainage systems, not to individually owned acreage. At 6:45 p.m., Michael changed into a crisp button-down shirt and grabbed a folder containing his research, including printouts of local environmental regulations that actually encourage water protection through features like wildlife ponds. As he walked the 3 blocks to the community center, neighbors waved hesitantly or quickly averted their eyes. News traveled fast in Whispering Pines. The community center was packed when Michael arrived. He recognized most of the faces: the retired couple who walked their golden retriever past his house every morning, the young family whose children played soccer in their front yard, the widow who had brought him cookies when he moved in. Neighbors he thought were becoming friends. "Ah, Mr. Radford, how nice of you to join us," Elaine announced as he entered, her voice carrying across the room. She stood in a podium at the front, flanked by the other board members. A PowerPoint slide displayed a hastily taken photo of Michael's pond project, with alarming red arrows pointing to various areas labeled violation. Since the subject of tonight's emergency meeting is present, we'll move directly to item 1 on our agenda: unapproved water features and the threat to community standards. For the next 20 minutes, Michael sat silently as Elaine detailed his supposed violations. She spoke of property values declining, of potential mosquito infestations, of liability issues if neighborhood children were attracted to the water. With each accusation, murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Michael felt eyes turning toward him. When Elaine finally paused for breath, she glanced at Michael with a thin smile. "Would you care to respond, Mr. Radford? Although I should remind everyone that the board has already voted on this matter." Michael stood slowly, clutching his folder. He walked to the front of the room, aware of the tension his presence created. But instead of addressing Elaine or the board, he turned to face his neighbors. "I moved to Whispering Pines because I fell in love with the natural beauty of this area," he began. "The pond I'm creating isn't just a water feature, it's a restoration project that will enhance the local ecosystem. It will provide habitat for native species, improve groundwater filtration, and actually reduce mosquito populations by attracting their natural predators." He opened his folder and held up a document. According to county regulations, water features that preserve natural springs and create wildlife habitat are not only permitted but encouraged. The HOA bylaws regulate drainage that affects community infrastructure, not conservation projects on private property. A hand raised in the middle of the room. It was Grant, Michael's neighbor. "I'm confused, Elaine. My koi pond was approved last year. How is Michael's wildlife pond different?" Before Elaine could respond, another neighbor spoke up. "And what about the Andersons' water garden? Or the fountain in the Paddle's backyard?" Elaine's face tightened. "Those were decorative features. Mr. Radford is excavating a significant portion of his property." "My property," Michael emphasized. 3 acres that I own, with a natural spring that was there long before Whispering Pines existed." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Then from the back, an elderly gentleman stood up. Michael recognized him as Walter Kemp, one of the community's original residents. "I remember when this was all just forest and farmland," Walter said, his voice wavering slightly with age. "We built this community to live in harmony with nature, not to police each other's backyards. I, for one, would like to see this pond when it's finished." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Elaine rapped her gavel sharply. "The board has made its decision. The cease and desist stands, as do the potential fines. This meeting is adjourned." As people filed out, several neighbors approached Michael, expressing support or curiosity about his project. For the first time since receiving the letter, he felt a glimmer of hope. But as he was leaving, Elaine stepped into his path. "This isn't over, Mr. Radford," she said quietly. "Whispering Pines has standards, and I've worked too hard maintaining them to let some newcomer undermine everything we've built." Michael met her gaze steadily. "You're right about one thing, Mrs. Winters. This isn't over." Walking home under the darkening sky, Michael made a decision. A 72-hour deadline would expire on Friday. He had 2 choices: capitulate to the HOA's demands or prepare for a fight that could cost him everything he'd worked for. As he reached his property and looked out at the half-finished pond gleaming in the moonlight, he knew there was really only one option. He would not be bullied off his own land. The morning after the HOA meeting, Michael woke with renewed determination. As he prepared his morning coffee, his phone buzzed with a text from Grant. "Check your email. Sent you something interesting about Elaine." Michael opened his laptop and found Grant's message waiting with a PDF attachment. It was a 5-year-old newsletter from Whispering Pines featuring an article about board elections. One paragraph stood out. "Board President Elaine Winters is spearheading an initiative to purchase the undeveloped 10-acre parcel adjacent to Whispering Pines for community use. We envision a nature preserve with walking trails and potentially a community pond," said Winters. Michael leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. His property bordered that same parcel, which had never been developed into the promised community space. Instead, it remained private land, now owned by a development company. A quick search revealed that Lakeside Properties had purchased it 3 years ago and had submitted preliminary plans for luxury condominiums. Further digging uncovered something even more interesting. Elaine's husband, Richard Winters, was listed as Lakeside Properties' legal counsel. "It's not about my pond at all," Michael muttered, reaching for his phone. He called Grant, who answered on the first ring. "Did you see it?" Grant asked without preamble. "I did. And I found the connection to Lakeside Properties." Michael explained what he discovered. "That explains why she's so adamant about stopping your project," Grant said. "A natural wildlife habitat bordering their development could complicate their permits. They'd have to prove their construction wouldn't impact protected wetlands." Michael spent the next few hours calling environmental agencies and researching county regulations. By noon, he had contacted the state's Environmental Protection Division and scheduled a site assessment for his property. The official he spoke with seemed particularly interested when Michael mentioned the natural spring and his profession as an environmental engineer. As he ended the call, a knock at his door surprised him. Standing on his porch was Walter Kemp, the elderly resident who had spoken of the meeting. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by," Walter said, leaning on his cane. "Thought you might like some company while you work on that pond." Michael invited Walter in, offering him coffee. As they sat at the kitchen table, Walter shared stories about the community's early days. "Whispering Pines was supposed to be different," Walter explained. "When we started this community 30 years ago, the vision was to build homes that respected the natural landscape. Each lot was larger back then, with deed restrictions that protected the mature trees and waterways." "What changed?" Michael asked. "Money," Walter sighed. "As the original owners aged out, newcomers wanted bigger houses, more amenities. The HOA board changed too. Used to be about preservation. Now it's about property values and uniformity." Walter pulled out a folded paper from his pocket, a yellowed map of the original community plan. "See this? Your spring was part of a network of natural water features that fed the creek running through the community. That 10-acre parcel next door was supposed to remain undeveloped as a water buffer. It was written into the original community charter." Michael studied the map, his engineer's mind calculating the implications. "Do you still have a copy of that original charter?" "In my files somewhere," Walter nodded. "I was the community's first secretary. Kept everything." By Thursday evening, one day before the HOA's deadline, Michael had assembled an impressive coalition. Walter had found the original community charter, which explicitly protected natural water features. Grant had quietly spoken with other neighbors, several of whom had their own grievances with the increasingly restrictive HOA rules. The State Environmental Protection Division had conducted their site visit and expressed strong interest in the spring on Michael's property. Most significantly, Michael had secured a temporary injunction against the HOA's fines, citing environmental protection statutes that superseded community bylaws. As he placed the injunction notice in an envelope addressed to the HOA board, his doorbell rang. Michael opened the door to find Elaine Winters and two men in business suits. "Mr. Radford," Elaine said, her voice easier than ever, "I'd like to introduce Thomas Reed, CEO of Lakeside Properties, and my husband, Richard Winters." Michael nodded but remained silent. "We've come to discuss a solution to our disagreement," Elaine continued. "Mr. Reed has authorized me to offer you a generous sum for your property, 20% above market value. You could relocate to a lovely community without these complications." Michael leaned against his doorframe, studying the three people before him. "That's very generous. May I ask why Lakeside Properties is so interested in my home?" Thomas Reed stepped forward, his expensive suit at odds with the casual neighborhood. "We believe your property would make an excellent addition to our planned development. The natural spring is a particular point of interest." "I imagine it would be," Michael replied, "especially since it feeds the wetlands that your development would otherwise be required to preserve or mitigate." Richard Winters' expression hardened. "That's a simplistic view of a complex situation." "Perhaps," Michael agreed. "But I scheduled a community meeting tomorrow evening to discuss the original Whispering Pines Charter and its water protection provisions. The Environmental Protection Division will be there. You're all welcome to attend." The color drained from Elaine's face. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Radford. The HOA bylaws are superseded by both the original community charter and state environmental regulations," Michael interrupted, handing her the envelope. "This is a temporary injunction against your fines. As for your offer, I'm not interested in selling. Not at any price." After they left, Michael stood at his window, watching their retreated figures. The fight was far from over, but for the first time he understood the true stakes. This wasn't just about his pond anymore. It was about the soul of Whispering Pines and the natural landscape it had been built to protect. By Friday evening, the Whispering Pines Community Center was filled beyond capacity. News of the confrontation between Michael and the developers had spread rapidly through the neighborhood. Residents who had never attended an HOA meeting before crowded into the room, standing along walls and spilling out into the hallway. Michael arrived early with Walter and Grant, setting up a table with documents, maps, and photographs. A representative from the Environmental Protection Division, a serious woman named Dr. Alicia Chen, joined them shortly after, carrying a portfolio of official reports. "The spring on your property is more significant than we initially thought," Dr. Chen told Michael quietly. "Our preliminary assessment confirms it's connected to the water system that feeds into the protected wetlands downstream. Any development that disrupts this flow would require extensive environmental impact studies and mitigation plans." At precisely 7:00 p.m., Michael stood to address the crowd. Before he could speak, the doors swung open and Elaine entered with her husband, Thomas Reed, and two unfamiliar men in suits. Behind them was a uniformed police officer. Mr. Radford, Elaine announced loudly, this unauthorized meeting has not been approved by the HOA board. As president, I must insist that you disperse immediately. The room fell silent. Michael maintained his composure despite the sudden tension. This isn't an HOA meeting, Mrs. Winters. It's a community gathering to discuss matters of public environmental concern, which is permitted under state law in any public facility. The police officer stepped forward. Ma'am, he's right. Unless there's a disturbance, citizens have the right to peaceable assembly. Elaine's face flushed, but she took a seat in the front row, her entourage following suit. Michael began by introducing Dr. Chen, who presented the Environmental Protection Division's preliminary findings. She showed maps of the underground spring system that connected Michael's property to the larger watershed and explained the ecological importance of preserving natural water features. Next, Walter stood shakily, leaning on his cane. He held up the original Whispering Pines Charter. I was there when this community was founded, he said, his voice wavering but clear. Our vision was to create homes that existed in harmony with nature, not against it. This charter specifically protects the natural springs and drainage systems that run through our properties. Walter placed his finger on a specific clause. It states here that any modifications to the community bylaws cannot contradict the water's protection provisions. These protections run with the land. They can't be removed by an HOA vote. Murmurs swept through the room as people processed this information. Elaine stood abruptly. This is absurd. That charter is 30 years old and has been superseded by numerous bylaw updates. As for this environmental assessment, it's premature and based on Mr. Radford's amateur project. There's nothing amateur about it, Michael countered calmly. He clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showing detailed engineering plans for his wildlife pond. These designs follow best practices for watershed management and habitat creation. As an environmental engineer, I specifically chose this property because of the spring and the opportunity it presented for conservation. Grant stood next. I've been gathering information from other communities with similar watershed features. In every case, natural ponds like Michael's are encouraged as beneficial to the ecosystem and property values. Thomas Reed stepped forward then, his confident demeanor commanding attention. While this ecological discussion is fascinating, it ignores the practical reality. Whispering Pines needs growth and modernization to remain competitive in the housing market. Our development plans include state-of-the-art stormwater management systems that will actually improve the current situation. Dr. Chen shook her head. With respect, Mr. Reed, engineered systems rarely outperform intact natural features. The spring network we've identified would be significantly compromised by the development footprint shown in your proposal. One of the unfamiliar men in suits stood and introduced himself as Lakeside Properties' environmental consultant. He launched into a technical rebuttal that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. As the debate grew heated, a quiet voice from the back of the room cut through the noise. It was Susan Mercer, a retired biology teacher who had lived in Whispering Pines for 20 years. I've been documenting the wildlife in our community for 2 decades, she said, walking slowly to the front. She opened a photo album showing birds, frogs, and native plants photographed throughout the neighborhood. Every year, we lose more habitat and see fewer species. Michael's Pond isn't just about one property, it's about whether we still believe in what Whispering Pines was meant to be. Her simple, heartfelt statement seemed to shift the atmosphere in the room. Other residents began to speak up, sharing memories of the community's natural beauty and expressing concern about increasingly restrictive HOA rules that prioritize uniform lawns over native landscapes. Sensing the changing mood, Elaine tried a different approach. The board has only ever acted in the best interest of property values. These environmental concerns may sound noble, but they could cost each of you thousands in home equity if prospective buyers are put off by unmaintained natural features. Michael saw his opportunity. Actually, I've prepared some data on that too. He displayed a chart showing property values in comparable communities. Neighborhoods that preserve natural features and promote wildlife have seen property values increase by an average of 12% more than those with conventional landscaping over the past decade. People are increasingly seeking connections to nature, not escaping from it. As the meeting stretched into its 3rd hour, a consensus began to emerge. Residents were concerned about both environmental protection and property values, but many were skeptical of the board's tactics and the developers' promises. Finally, Walter proposed a resolution: form a committee to review the original charter, update the bylaws to explicitly protect natural features like Michael's Pond, and require any future development to undergo community environmental review. When put to an informal vote, the resolution passed overwhelmingly. Even some board members present broke ranks to support it. As the meeting disbanded, Michael stood by his display, accepting thanks and expressions of support from neighbors he'd barely known before. He watched as Elaine huddled with her husband and the developers, their expressions tense. Grant appeared at his side. You realize they won't give up easily, right? There's too much money involved. Michael nodded. I know, but neither will we. Walking home under a canopy of stars, Michael felt a profound connection to this land and community that he hadn't anticipated when he first moved to Whispering Pines. What had begun as a personal project, a pond for his own healing and enjoyment, had evolved into something much larger, a stand for the community's founding values and the natural world they all shared. The next morning would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time since receiving that threatening letter, Michael slept peacefully, the gentle sound of the spring outside his window a reminder of what he was fighting for. The weeks following the community meeting brought both challenges and unexpected victories for Michael. True to Grant's prediction, Lakeside Properties and the HOA board, still led by an increasingly isolated Elaine Winters, didn't surrender easily. First came the legal maneuvers. Michael received a thick envelope containing a cease and desist order from Lakeside's attorneys, claiming his pond would cause irreparable harm to their development plans. The HOA board, despite the community's clear sentiment at the meeting, voted 3-2 to enforce the original fines, though the amount had mysteriously dropped from $60,000 to $1,000 per day. But Michael was prepared. With Dr. Chen's preliminary assessment backing him, he filed for permanent environmental protection status for the spring on his property. Walter's discovery of the original charter proved invaluable. The county records office confirmed that the water's protections were indeed binding covenants that ran with the land regardless of subsequent HOA bylaw changes. The story might have devolved into a protracted legal battle had nature not intervened. 3 weeks after the community meeting, unusually heavy rains saturated the region. Streets flooded in communities throughout the county, except in the section of Whispering Pines where Michael's half-finished pond had already begun functioning as a retention basin, exactly as he had designed it. As neighbors from flooded areas drove past Michael's property, they could see the pond doing its job, collecting excess water that would otherwise have rushed downstream into their basements and foundations. What had seemed like one man's passion project suddenly revealed itself as practical infrastructure benefiting everyone. Local news stations picked up the story. Neighborhood pond prevents flooding, read one headline. Another proclaimed, engineer's foresight saves homes during deluge. Camera crews interviewed Michael standing beside his pond, now brimming with rainwater that sparkled in the sunlight after the storms had passed. I didn't build this just for myself, Michael explained to one reporter, Walter standing proudly at his side. These natural systems have always been here, protecting the land. I'm just helping restore what was lost. When the reporter asked about the HOA's opposition, Michael chose his words carefully. Communities sometimes need to balance tradition with progress. Whispering Pines is finding its way forward. The publicity brought unexpected allies. The County Water Management Board contacted Michael about using his pond design as a model for other communities. A local university's environmental science department asked if students could monitor the pond's development as a case study in suburban water management. Most significantly, 3 members of the Whispering Pines HOA board resigned following the flooding, amid questions about their judgment in opposing a project that had demonstrably protected homes. An emergency election was held to fill the vacant board positions. Grant ran and won handily, as did Susan Mercer and another neighbor who had spoken in favor of Michael's pond. The new board's first action was to unanimously rescind all fines against Michael and to begin updating the bylaws to align with the original charter's environmental protections. Elaine Winters remained on the board, though her influence had diminished dramatically. The day after the election, Thomas Reed's sleek car pulled into Michael's driveway. Mr. Radford, Reed began, his tone more respectful than during a previous encounter. I'll be direct. The publicity around your pond has complicated our development plans. Michael waited silently. Our investors are concerned about the potential for environmental challenges, particularly with the state now involved. Reed handed Michael a folder. We've revised our proposal. Instead of high-density condominiums, we're considering a smaller footprint of eco-friendly homes with 30% of the parcel preserved as natural habitat. Michael glanced through the plans. And you're showing me this because we'd like your input, Reed admitted. Your environmental engineering background and local popularity could be valuable to us. We're prepared to offer you a consulting role. Michael couldn't help but smile at the irony. I'll look these over and give you my honest assessment, but any development would need to preserve the spring network and maintain the natural drainage patterns. We understand that now, Reed nodded. Sometimes the most profitable approach isn't the most obvious one. By summer, Michael's pond had matured into a thriving ecosystem. Native water lilies bloomed on the surface, while dragonflies darted among the cattails and sedges he planted along the edges. Frogs had appeared seemingly from nowhere, their evening chorus becoming a neighborhood fixture that drew children with notebooks and magnifying glasses. Michael built a small observation deck on one side of the pond with educational signage explaining the water system and identifying common wildlife. It became an unofficial community gathering spot where neighbors would stop to chat while walking dogs or bring visitors to see Whispering Pines' famous pond. The final chapter in the saga came on a warm September evening when the new HOA board hosted a community picnic beside Michael's pond. Folding tables lined the grassy area nearby, laden with potluck dishes and coolers of drinks. Children played hide-and-seek among the native grasses Michael had planted, while adults mingled and admired the transformation of what had once been an ordinary backyard. As twilight settled over the gathering, Grant tapped a glass for attention and called Michael forward. When Michael moved to Whispering Pines 18 months ago, none of us could have predicted how he would change our community, Grant began. Some of us thought he was just building a pond. It turns out he was reminding us of who we've always been. Grant unveiled a small bronze plaque mounted on a stone to be placed beside the pond. Radford Springs Protected Waters Habitat, established 2024. As applause rippled through the crowd, Michael noticed Elaine Winters standing at the edge of the gathering. After a moment's hesitation, he walked over to her. "It's a lovely evening," he offered. Elaine nodded stiffly. "You've won over quite a fan club." "This was never about winning," Michael replied. "Communities evolve. The best ones preserve what matters while adapting to new understanding." Elaine studied the pond, its surface reflecting the first stars appearing overhead. "Richard and I are moving," she said finally. "He's taken a position with a firm in Arizona." "I'm sorry to hear that," Michael said, surprised to find he meant it. "Are you?" Elaine asked, a hint of her old sharpness returning. Then she sighed. "The development is proceeding with your recommendations. Richard says they're actually marketing the environmental aspects as a premium feature now." She shook her head. "Apparently, people will pay extra for houses near protected wetlands." Michael suppressed a smile. "The market evolves too." As Elaine walked away, Walter joined Michael by the water's edge. The elderly man's health had improved over the summer, his daily walks to the pond becoming part of his routine. "You know," Walter said thoughtfully, "when we founded this community, this is exactly what we imagined. People gathering by the water, children learning about nature, neighbors looking out for each other and the land." Michael looked around at the community he fought for and found, unexpectedly, that he was home. The $60,000 per day threat seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the living reality of a community reconnecting with its founding values. "Sometimes," Michael replied, watching a blue heron land gracefully at the pond's far edge, "you have to fight for the things that shouldn't need defending." Walter nodded, resting his hand on Michael's shoulder. "And sometimes, when you do, you discover you weren't fighting alone after all." As Mike fell fully over Whispering Pines, the pond reflected the gathered community, imperfect, evolving, but finding its way back to harmony with the natural world that had been there all along, waiting to be remembered.